Thank you everyone for joining us for another Learning Lunch hosted by FormatApproved.com. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the Senior Director of Online Education with Format Approved, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's Learning Lunch title is PQRS for Clinicians. We're joined today by Joy Rios of Format Approved. Joy is an expert in both meaningful use and EHR proficiency, with years of real-world experience in meaningful use attestation, EHR implementation, and optimization. Joy has a unique talent for taking forbidding materials such as PQRS and distilling it down to the information you need to succeed. Before we begin, some brief notes. Please note that you can ask questions of our presenter at any time during this session by entering them into the chat area. In the second half of our presentation, we'll address as many questions as time allows. If we do run out of time, answers to all submitted questions will be posted to our website and sent via email link later in the week. Also, remember that all registered attendees of today's session will receive an email with links to both the slides and the recorded version of the event. So we often get questions during this session about getting the slides, and rest assured that we'll send them out to you. All right, let's go ahead and begin. First of all, Joy, thank you for joining us. These are always very informative and popular sessions.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks again for having me.
All right, well, people may have a passing familiarity with PQRS, but can you give us an overview of the program?
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's the Physician Quality Reporting System program, and it was launched in 2006 by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. And essentially they were trying to establish a standard for satisfactory reporting for Medicare claims. And it's the result of a Tax Relief and Health Care Act of that year, and that's what authorized the financial incentives for eligible professionals to participate in this program. And it's a voluntary program. Those incentives are authorized to go through the year 2014, but part of that act, they were also included some penalties for not participating, and those begin in 2015. So that's not super soon, but the key to that 2015 penalty is that they're basing it on the reporting from this year. So 2013 has been kind of a big year for folks. So the incentive money is specifically for Medicare Part B physicians who submit clinical data on their prescribed medical and drug treatments for certain conditions. And over time, they started out with just being able to report these measures through claims, the CMS Form 1500 claims, but over time they increased the measures and the reporting options to facilitate the needs of a broader number of eligible professionals and group practices. So these measures are updated annually. They allow for additions and revisions or deletions or whatnot, and eligibility is for folks that are have a national provider identification number and a tax identification number. So now there are 4 different main ways to report, and that's through the claims. There's registries, through qualified EHRs or EHR data submission vendors, and then also the group practices reporting option, which they have a specific web interface, or they can use registries to report. And so what they can report, there's a total of 258 individual measures that cover chronic care and prevention and all kinds of things. And then there's also groups of measures, and there's 22 different groups that are around things like diabetes care or back pain. And for the majority of all of these measures, mostly it's a full calendar year of reporting, so it's January 1, 2013 to December 31, but there's one specific reporting method, which is the registries. That if you're reporting registries and a group measure, then you have a 6-month reporting period, and that's from July 1 of this year till the end of the year.
All right, well, that's a great overview, a lot of complexity there, and I know we're going to unpack it as we go along here. So you talked a little bit about reporting. There's these different ways of doing it. Can you talk more about the options involved?
Yeah, sure. Turns out that, there's those four options, but then those get broken down even further. So in total, there are 13 different ways to satisfactorily report on measures, and it really depends on, which method you choose. If you choose the claims registry, the EHR, or the group practices, and then also whether you're choosing the individual measures and the measures group. And it's the registries and the EHRs, well, and the groups that kind of have a few more options. And that's when, there's a decision tree that's available through CMS website where you can look at which one makes the most sense for your practice, and then kind of decide from there, okay, if you're going to go claims, are you going to be doing individual or group? And then also, are you going to be reporting on paper claims or electronic claims? And essentially, we'll walk you through the different methods. So, of those 13 ways, it's sort of a choose your own adventure, whichever way makes the most sense to your practice. In looking at, okay, starting at looking at what measures are available, which involve things that you treat typically at your office, and then kind of choosing and selecting, narrowing and filtering down from there. That's I think a good way to go about choosing the right measure, the right method for you.
And we're going to share some resources with our guests later on that will help show them that decision tree. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's also, you can do a Google search. I'm not sure if it's included in the resources here, but it's just CMS decision tree. It'll come to the top of results.
Okay, so you were talking before about how it's a voluntary program. What happens if providers choose not to participate?
So if they do nothing this year, there is a penalty. So start in 2015. Two things can happen by participating this year. If you are able to satisfactorily report, you can, one, qualify for the incentive, which is 0.5% of your physician fee schedule for Medicare Part B. But you can also avoid a negative 2%, I believe, negative adjustment payment in 2015. So that 0.5% benefit is available this year and next year. And so, but if you don't do anything, you'll absolutely will get that penalty in 2015. And then so the penalty continues on basically going forward. So if you don't participate this year, you get stuck in 2015. If you don't participate next year, that adjustment will be applied to 2016. So it's sort of the time crunch is we're running out of time to get folks on board.
Do the penalties phase in similarly to meaningful use, rising, or do they stick at, did you say 2.5%?
It's 2%, and I believe that they just stick at 2%. It's okay. There'll be a continual 2% going forward.
But I think it's interesting as part of this discussion that if people are looking at PQRS and then also meaningful use, which phases over to reimbursement penalties in 2015, and that does rise over time, that really becomes quite a potential hit to revenues. Those two taken together rise to 7%.
Exactly.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, so if they don't, good point. If they don't do anything, then with either the EHR program or PQRS, that negative adjustment will certainly add up. They'll feel it.
So how can providers avoid the penalty?
There were 3 ways in total, but we passed a deadline. It was October 24th. That if you wanted to do a claims-based administrative, have CMS calculate your administrative claims, it wouldn't be to help qualify for the incentive, but it would avoid the penalty. So that date has passed. Now there's 2 options left. One, you can either meet the requirements from any of those 13 different options or methods that you can report, or if you are not interested in the incentive at all and folks are only interested in avoiding the penalty, then you can report just one valid measure, either an individual measure or a measures group, and you can do that via claims, registry, or the EHR method. So, if, it shouldn't be, to avoid it is pretty simple from one of those methods. So, you can grab a CMS form 1500, that's through the claim, or the electronic 836 or 837P is the electronic claim that can be reported, or connect with a registry and they'll help walk you through the whole process, and we'll go over that.
All right, well, I just want to remind our audience that you can ask questions at any time during today's session. We've already got a few from our guests, so we welcome those. We're going to save those for the second half of our session, and then we'll shoot them over to Joy.
Can I make one clarification? In 2000, the negative payment adjustment in 2015 is 1.5%, and then from there in 2016 it goes to 2% and then stays there. So I just wanted to clarify that.
No, that's helpful, and we've already had a couple of questions about the penalties, so we'll follow up with those if we don't resolve the issue here during the session. But thanks for that clarification. So there's a lot of options here. Maybe people are feeling overwhelmed by all the options. What's sort of the most hassle-free way of going about this?
Sure. So if you just want to avoid the penalty, report on one individual measure via a claim, via the claims method, or actually registries are a really great way of going about it too, because those folks are extremely knowledgeable. They know they've done this. They have a much higher success rate. So because the claims method was originally made, it's theirs for billing reasons specifically. It's not necessarily a method that's designed for reporting. So they have really had like a lower success rate on the claims method. It's about 70%. So that just means that sometimes, well, what you need is to get a response or an acknowledgement from CMS, and it's an N365. That's the code that will come back on your remittance advice, and it'll tell you, okay, we have received your intent to report on this particular measure. We understand that it's not a billable thing, it's just for reporting only. So that's how you would know that it has been received. But when you sign up for a registry, those folks will literally hold your hand through it. And they will tell you exactly what they need, and they know how to submit it, and they have much higher success rates. So the majority of registries have about a 90% success rate, but then there's one in particular that has a 99.9% success rate, and that's this PQRS wizard. So if you go online, it's at pqrswizard.com, and you can sign up directly through that registry. They are one of the verified qualified registries and data submission vendors, and they will essentially walk you through step by step every single thing that needs to happen. So you can decide if you want to be reporting on a measures group or individual, and they'll lay out all of the requirements, all of the criteria, and then as you go through it, they will, you can see everything that's available. It's very, very similar to, doing your taxes with TurboTax, and doing, where they have it all laid out. You have a map that says what you're missing and what you need and what you should expect and timing-wise, and they seem to be very, very successful and competent at what they do. So I would say that, having somebody on your team that can help you make sure and guarantee that you're, doing what needs to be done is always just, helps you sleep a little bit better at night, I think.
So you talked about that registry. What are other ways that people can find a registry, and what should they expect?
So the CMS, they have a list of qualified registries on their website, and I'll give those to you guys at the end. You can seek out, there's a list of I don't know, 50 of them or so, and they have all their contact information, their websites, so, and what their specialties are, because some of them have, specialize in maybe measures groups, or they only support some of the measures and not all of them. So it's a good way of kind of dividing and figuring out which one would work best for you. These registries typically are not free. They typically have a fee associated with them, so I would say something to expect per eligible professional might be about a $300 charge per year to report on them. And what they will do is you would essentially take your patients, they can either gather information from your EHR, so if you can give them the reporting from your EHR, and they will figure out how to input it in such a way that it will be accepted by CMS for their reporting standards and specifications, or you can submit them to the claims and other things. So they'll pretty much will hold your hand through it, and kind of you'll get an account manager, somebody who can walk you through the process and sort of give you assignments. Hey, send me this, send me that, etc. And one thing that's good about these registries is that they have a little bit of a longer time deadline that they can report up to. So all of the PQRS reporting will happen between January 1, 2014 and February 28th. And I believe that the registries have a little bit of an extended deadline through like March 11th or so. So they can, it gives them a little bit extra time that they can grab reports from patients from encounters earlier in the year in 2013. And then also it gives you time that if you can think about patients that are coming in that meet the requirements of these specific measure specifications, then you can include your prospective encounters as well. So it's certainly I'd say worth the trouble if you're late to the game and really don't know where to start or what you're doing. So.
Okay, so what about data that's already been submitted? Is there a way for providers to check on that data?
Absolutely. They actually it was just recently, within the last week or so, CMS posted what's called an interim feedback dashboard. And what they do is this dashboard allows the end users to immediately view their current interim data through the website. So if you log on to, it's at qualityreporting.net or something, the resource is at the end here. But you can look at specifically claims data that have been submitted through January and March of this year to see if you've already submitted. They can acknowledge it and then kind of give you an idea of how much of your incentive would be, the timing of the incentive, and then they're constantly updating it too. So anybody who has reported, it's eligible professionals. You can view information as the taxpayer ID number summary or as an individual NPI detail. And essentially it's just a great way to be able to monitor the status of your claims-based individual measures and measures groups reporting to determine if you meet the requirements for this year or if you can avoid the payment. So if you were unaware of this dashboard, I'd say go ahead and check it out, because then it gives you a status update of where you currently stand with CMS.
You talked before about the option to do EHR reporting. Can you tell us more about how that works?
Yeah, sure. EHR gives you, this one is a little bit, I didn't include it on the hassle-free question, because they have their simple guide to EHR reporting, and it's something like 22 steps. So they have 3 different ways of doing it. Yeah, you can choose, if you have, I'm sure you've all heard of certified EHR technology, and that is something that is used for the EHR incentive program. But there's also what they call PQRS qualified EHRs, and that means that those EHRs specifically have been certified to submit PQRS data directly to CMS. there's a list for that they provide. They're qualified vendors, and that list, to be honest, is not very long.
I was going to ask, how common is it for EHRs to go through that process of getting qualified for PQRS? Not that common.
It's not that common. So, I mean, when you think about how many EHRs are out there and how many are on the list, you can see, okay, that's clearly not like a top priority for folks. So there's another way to do it. You can do it through an EHR data submission vendor. So there's also a list to find those folks on the CMS website too. But what they will do is if you have PQRS information chronicled in your EHR, what you can do is they can help extract all that data, and then they can format it in a way so that they can submit it to CMS so that they'll accept it. So it's not directly coming from your EHR, but it's the data that's specifically from your EHR. So that's a slight difference. And then lastly, they are trying really, really hard to overlap and kind of have some more cohesion between these two programs, between the EHR incentive program and the PQRS. So I'm sure you're familiar with the clinical quality measures. For 2013, there's 44 to choose from, which is very different from PQRS. PQRS has the 258 to choose from. So it's a much smaller list, but if you were to choose the same ones for both programs, then they have created a program pilot, and it's pretty much a web interface that you would log into separate from your EHR incentive program attestation, that it would capture the data for both clinical quality measures and the PQRS information, and then it would submit it both at the same time.
Now, a question about that, Joy. So you said that it's separate from attestation. Is there a duplication of effort on the CQMs then? Are you submitting your CQM data as part of your attestation, but then also doing it for the pilot?
No, because next year the CQMs are different. They have in the 2014 is the electronic CQM submissions. So with now how they've set before, CQMs used to be part of the core objectives. And now they've sort of separated them. They're their own entity. So when you submit your attestation, it would be for your core and menu objectives, and then the CQMs is a separate thing. But they collect them all together in order to generate the incentive and the funds and the payment to send it out to you.
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that more here during the question and answer, but it's good to hear that they're trying to bring these programs in line a little bit. I'm sure that's helpful.
Yeah, they're trying. It's difficult.
Well, here let's talk about it a little bit more then. And you've talked before in other sessions we've done about strategies for aligning CQM and PQRS. So let's talk a little bit more about how this would work for people.
Sure. Okay, so for the PQRS, now the requirements are that if you choose the individual measures for PQRS, you only need to choose 3. You either choose 3 individual measures or you choose 1 measures group. However, if you decide to go with the PQRS Medicare EHR incentive program pilot, you report on more. So you would report on, for 2013, you'd be reporting on 6 measures, and for 2014, you'd be reporting on 9 measures, because that's what the new requirement is for CQMs starting next year and going forward. So for 2013, they're kind of specific about which measures you choose as well. You would choose first from the core measures. There's 3 that they have chosen, and then there's 3 alternate core. So if those 3 don't work for you, then you can choose from the other 3, and then they want you to choose 3 from the remaining 38 that are available. So for 2013, let me see if I can be clear about this. For 2013, there's 44 total measures available. 6 of those would have to be chosen. In order to have it go through the system and use their pilot, you have to indicate on the CMS registration and attestation system your intent to report and participate in this PQRS program pilot. So it's, it's one question, you mark a checkbox, and then, and then then follow a different set of instructions to report both. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the timing of the incentive payment. So this is more for 2014, because next year the requirements change for CQMs. It's not going to be 6 measures, it'll be 9 measures, and they have a 9 recommended set for adults and a 9 recommended set for pediatricians, and then they've increased the number of measures to 64 total that you can choose from. So they tried to make it a little bit to facilitate, the options being available for and applicable to more eligible professionals. But 2014 is kind of an interesting year, because we're transitioning from stage 1 to stage 2. Everybody's EHR incentive program is limited to the 90-day period. So as long as that is is aligned with one of the quarters, a 90-day quarter. But PQRS is still a year long. So for next year, it would be the 9 measures total that you would be reporting for a year. So if you happen to be one of those folks that is, reporting in 2014, the first quarter or the second quarter, your incentive payment wouldn't show up and wouldn't arrive for an additional year, because it wouldn't be until spring of 2015, because of to allow for time for PQRS reporting.
So you're saying that people who didn't participate in the pilot, if they're doing their quarterly attestation, their incentive payment would arrive after they attest, whereas people who are doing the PQRS pilot program, the joint program, their payment would be delayed because of the fact that they have to report PQRS for the whole year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
But you can see that there's a lot of appeal in combining the two.
Yeah, if you're not intimidated by it, go for it. I think that, and if you're in a position that one of your that your EHR happens to be on that list, then you're in a great spot. So, resources.
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about some of the resources you've provided to our guests.
Sure. So this top one is the PQRS dashboard. So if you have submitted claims and you want to know whether or not CMS has received them, and just be clear, like whether or not you qualify for the incentive or to avoid the penalty, then you can go to qualitynet.org/PQRS. They have a ton of instructions there, and a lot of other resources to help you figure that out. If you're looking for a registry, you can follow this link here, and that has a long list of the 2013 participating registry vendors. And then if you're looking for a data submission, so if you have been capturing PQRS data in your EHR and you want to go through an EHR data submission vendor, you can find those people through the third link. And then I recently have there's so many resources available out there. CMS has a listserv that if you just want to be up to date on things, you can you can choose what it is you want to be up to date with, and anything EHR incentive program or PQRS or CQM related, you can make sure that you have the most recent information and get on CMS's list to send out, either weekly emails, or however you can adjust it however you want, daily, weekly, monthly type deal. And that's that last one there. So I found that to be really helpful. That's not something that was obvious. I hadn't found it earlier, so I figured it'd be a good thing to share.
Yeah, it's one of the things about HHS, I think, is that there's many really wonderful tools on there. It's not always easy to find all of them. So your explorations are very helpful to people, I think.
You know, actually, I've actually found it so interesting that here we talk about structured data constantly, about figuring out, okay, how can you use this information? How can we analyze information? How can we, get more out of it?
Mm-hmm.
And yet CMS's website is very difficult to navigate. I feel like they could follow their own advice on that.
Yeah, I'm sure that many people out there might agree with you. And, I believe today the Chief Technology Officer resigned, so there's all sorts of movement on that front. I have a feeling that has more to do with the health exchanges than anything else. So that aside,
Sure.
I'm leaving the screen up for a while because we've had some nervous chats, questions from people, making sure that they'll get the slides later. These are not exactly the most user-friendly URLs in the world. Again, you can thank CMS for that.
No.
But again, we will send those slides out to all of our guests and even people who didn't make it to today's session. So you'll be able to grab those then. But for anyone who's in a hurry to get them now, we are, I believe, into our question and answer period. So we'll just leave it up for a little bit. So if you want to jot those down or enter them into your browser, please go ahead. And again, we'll send them out again later. We also sent a chat out linking people to the CMS decision tree that Joy mentioned. That is also a rather long URL. But you should be able to see that in your chat area, the link to that PDF. And then finally, the wizard that you talked about before, that's a private company called PQRS Wizard, and that's pqrswizard.com, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
All right, so that's another one that people may be interested in taking a look at, especially for a hassle-free solution on this stuff. But let's go ahead and get into our questions and answers. We have a lot of questions from people. So let's go ahead and get into them. And again, if you have questions, this is a rare opportunity to ask Joy anything that you may have questions about regarding PQRS or reporting in general. And I'd like to, before we begin, one last thing is that sometimes people ask really technical questions, which we certainly welcome those. But we give Joy the right to defer answering them if they're especially complicated, or if she needs to check on something to be sure that the answer is accurate. She may send those out in the written responses that follow up from this event. All right, but let's get into our questions. This question is about PQRS in 2014. If a provider wants to report CQMs for just the quarter they are reporting for meaningful use, what is the method they will use to report since it won't be done through attestation? So I think you've touched on that, but maybe give some clarity on that issue. And let me know if you need me to read the question again.
Well, essentially what you would be doing, you'd be choosing the same measures for CQMs as you would be choosing for PQRS. So for your core and menu objectives, you would only be reporting on those for 90 days. But your CQMs would have a longer reporting period. So in order for them to facilitate the overlap, they need, they haven't changed that particular method yet. So you would be required to report on the same measures for CQMs for the full calendar year. That's where a little bit of the complication comes in. It's if you understand that and you're willing to wait, for the delayed incentive payment, then it's fine. But you'd also be sort of killing two birds with one stone with the PQRS. So I don't know. It could work really well for some people, and for other people it might not be the best solution.
Right, it's something that they would need to think through depending on their own circumstances. All right, so this is a question about the penalties, which I think we addressed, but let's just be clear. The question was, are the penalties 2% and then they rise to 4% and then to 6%? And my understanding is that they start at 1.5, they rise to 2, and then they stay at 2. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, yeah. So depending on what you do for 2013, this year, if you do not even report anything, this is if you do nothing, then you'll get the negative 1.5% payment adjustment in 2015. And then if you continue doing nothing next year, then you'll get a 2% negative payment adjustment in 2016. And that continues on. it maxes out at the 2%.
All right, and then there's a kind of a related question, which is, and I'm not sure I understand this, but the question is, to avoid the penalty, is that just for this year and next year? So go ahead.
You would have to, if you were going to avoid the penalty, you would this year by doing something, then you would be avoiding the 2015 penalty. But again, if you didn't do anything, if you decided not to do anything next year, then you would get hit by that 2% penalty in 2016. So there is action required from each eligible provider every single year in order to avoid that penalty.
And to be clear, we're talking about 2013 to avoid that 2015 penalty.
Yes.
Okay.
And you have to do something in 2014 to avoid 2016. So
and
if you do something now and then you don't do anything next year, then you're still going to get hit with a penalty in 2016.
So that's a good point. It's a yearly thing. It's not a one-off. You've got to report every year to avoid the penalty, but there's a stagger between the reporting and the penalty.
Right.
Okay, I think this is one we've addressed.
I think that a lot of this...
Go ahead.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think a lot of this is just trying to get people into the habit of reporting, and it's sort of that transition between, you know, we're paying you to report versus now we're penalizing you for not reporting, and then that can, you know, slowly go into the pay for performance model. So I think it's just a staggered, staged process that we're going through, and we're just right in the middle of the change.
Right, and so that makes it, when it goes from the carrot to the stick, that's obviously kind of a fraught period. But I also think it's interesting that these reporting, you know, it's sort of like a baby steps, I guess, that the reporting, if you look at CQNs for stage 1, for instance, that's a relatively manageable list, but now in stage 2, the list grows, and we can anticipate that these reporting standards will continue to grow over time. And so one takeaway from that is that there's certainly no sense in waiting to participate because it's not going to get any easier.
Well, I think that they're also trying to please everybody. There's a little bit of paradox of choice going on when you have just too many things to choose from. So, I mean, it started out as a program that was very simple with just the claims as the option. And then you can go from paper claims to electronic claims. And then they opened up the registry. And then they opened up the EHR. And then they opened up a web interface for the groups. And so you end up having something that's, you know, intention is to be very simple, but it confuses people because there's just so many options to choose from. So I think that they're trying really hard to make it, you know, make it something that more people can get value out of, but at the same time it's difficult to do that without making it more complex.
Yes, and I think that's always a difficult balance for these programs, is how do you make it inclusive enough without just making it so complicated that no one can understand how to comply with it.
Right.
So let me see this question. Okay, so I think we've addressed this, but I'll just go ahead and repeat it, and then if you want to add anything, please go ahead. The question is, we meet meaningful use stage 1. Can we use the same data to meet PQRS and report on the overlapping measures?
You meet me here if it's, yeah, probably. I would double check and make sure that the measures, it depends on how you're going to report them. All the measures and CQM data that is available for the EHR incentive program are also available for PQRS. So it would certainly make sense that if you meet meaningful use stage 1, that you would qualify. However, keep in mind depending on what year you're in, if you're year 1, that's just a 90-day reporting period. PQRS requires the full calendar year reporting period. And so they're also, and one thing I haven't really gone into too much detail here is the threshold that they're looking for the satisfactory reporting. For claims, you just need to have 50% of your patients that are the Medicare, you know, that qualify for Medicare Part B in that physician fee schedule. And then for registries and EHR and the web interface, for the most part, those are an 80% threshold. So I would double check, and I wouldn't just assume that because you meet meaningful use stage 1 that you automatically qualify for stage 2. It really would be important to look at, you know, which measures you're reporting on, and the reporting period, and the thresholds, making sure that you meet the thresholds for both.
All right. This question is, we've been reporting our PQRS on our claims. Is it still necessary that we report via one of the additional ways to be compliant?
No, you only need to choose one. That's all that's necessary. So if you have been reporting on claims, then I would recommend going to that dashboard and just making sure that they have received them. Or if they're not currently up there, since that dashboard is relatively new and is just checking on, and is just currently reporting on January through March claims that were submitted, I would look at your remittance advice records and look for that acknowledgement symbol, and it's N365, N365. And if you've received that on any of your RAs, then that means that they've received them. So they can't guarantee that you're qualified, but at least you know that they've received the information that you've reported.
Here we have an interesting complication, and I don't know that this is anything that we can resolve, but I think it's worth sharing, and maybe you can comment on it, Joy. The issue is that they're having their EHR IT people look into a problem they're having. So they say that 3079F and 3075F, those are measures, didn't show up on our report for the third quarter of 2013. I asked why the measures were on the report for the first and second, but not the third quarter. Our doctor is insistent that he does what he's supposed to do. We see these measures on the remittance advice. Do you think that the EMR software could have a glitch? Obviously, that's a complicated problem, Joy, but do you have any comment on that?
I would say it's entirely possible that the EHR, that it's, you know, it's something with the EHR. So keep in mind that just because an EHR is certified, first of all, certification requires, for an EHR, they need to be able to meet a certain number of clinical quality measures. And I believe that that number is something around 9 or 10, something like that. Now, even with EHR incentive program, there's 44 measures currently that can be reported on. Not all EHR systems can report on all quality measures. So imagine how much more complicated that would get for the PQRS qualified EHRs, because they must have the capability to report on all of the measures, the 258 individual and the 22 measures group. So I have seen in the past that, you know, that's one of the things to take into consideration when you're choosing which measures to report on, because you not only do you have to look at, okay, what do you see within your practice, you know, what types of what patients are you seeing and what types of conditions are you seeing, and filter it down that way, but also what is your EHR capable of reporting on. They may not line up, and I have seen that happen in the past. So it doesn't particularly make sense that it was being able to report it in the first quarter and not the second quarter. So that part doesn't necessarily add up. I would, you know, if it had the potential to report on that information before, but not now, I don't know the answer to why that would I would look at, you know, I think it's smart to get the IT folks involved in making sure that, you know, there's something, was something not clicked or checked off, or, you know, what button did that
or did something get unchecked that was checked, you know. There's so many.
Right.
And I think this is another case where even if you don't have problems, it sounds like if you're starting with this program, one of the things you need to do is work with your EHR vendor to determine what capabilities your system has.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of those things that helps you figure out, okay, which method am I going to use to report? Because even with the EHR data submission vendors, if you know, they can extract information from your EHR, but if your EHR isn't capturing the information in such a way that it is, reporting it specifically for PQRS, then or a certain measure within PQRS, then you may hit a road bump or every now and again. So all important things to take into consideration.
Well, and that's certainly the good thing about the different options you have, is that it adds complexity, but it does give you a way to find sort of the path of least resistance. So here's a question about the PQRS wizard, and I don't know if you know the answer to this. Again, we don't have any relationship around PQRS wizard, but we've found it to be a helpful resource. The question is it free? I'm assuming that like the other registries, there is a fee involved.
Yeah, no, this one is, it's not free, and it is, let me see, if you go to their website, I think per eligible professional, it's about $299 per EP, and then they have, if you're a group practice of 2 to a certain, they have tiered pricing, I'm pretty sure. So if you're a practice between 2 and 24 doctors, it'd be one price, and then they also have, I think, a 25 to 99 or 100 plus. And depending on the size of your group and how many people would be reporting, I'm sure that they would be able to quote you, competitive prices on that. But yeah, that option is certainly, it's not the free option. The free option is claims. That is just simply start reporting on a claim.
So it comes down to whether people are in a position to pay a little extra for the convenience of the tool.
Right.
And certainly go to their website to learn more about pricing options. Here's another question for you, Joy. If you already started submitting via claims, but providers are not meeting the 50%, can you switch to registry or another method of reporting?
I believe you can. But if you're not meeting that 50%, take into consideration that if you report via registry, that threshold increases to 80%. So I don't know that that would necessarily be in your best interest. It might be, but they would certainly be able to help you figure out, okay, where you've gone wrong, or maybe capture information that maybe you didn't capture before, something along those lines. But you can switch methods. I think that there is one in particular. So, okay, not for this year, since that deadline is over, the CMS administered method, which was simply there so that people could avoid the penalty. That one, if you chose that method in the past, sometime this year, and I'm sure that that method will be available next year as well, if you choose that method, then you cannot, then I don't think we can switch, because essentially you're saying my intent is not to go for the incentive, it's only to avoid the penalty, and they're the ones that are analyzing all of your submitted claims and figuring out, which measures would apply to your practice. So I'm pretty sure that that's the only one of the 13 that you can't switch. Also keep in mind, if you're a group practice that's higher than 20, I believe 25 EPs, then you are limited to the ways that you can report, and that is through the web interface or a registry. So the EHR and the claims get taken away for groups that are larger, and mainly because, well, the claims, you have to report down to the NPI number per line item. So that can get really complicated really quickly when you have 100 or more, or 25 or more doctors in an office, and you're trying to pack as much information on a claim as possible. So there's that to take into consideration as well.
All right, here's a confession and a question. The confession is, I'm very new to this. I think that's true of lots of people. So you have lots of company in that. The question is, we've been told by our EHR provider that to avoid the penalty in 2015, we must add a code regarding medication verification. We've done this, but what is required in 2014 to avoid penalties in 2016?
So so you would have to, I don't know which measure that would apply to. You can find the list of measures also on, there's the CMS website, and you go, cms.gov/PQRS, and you can download the list of the individual measures and the measures group. Now, what your EHR vendor told you about that very specific item, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe that's the, you do just need to report on one individual measure or one group measure in order to avoid the 2015 penalty, and maybe your EHR vendor just decided that's the one. This is all that we need to do in order to do it. But I would double check and get the information of what specific measure that that meets, and then also try to be a little bit more intentional about it. If there's something else that makes more sense for your practice in particular, then go with that particular measure. And now the same would be true for 2014 to avoid the 2016. So if you're, if you're not looking at all for the incentive payment, and it's not that much, it's 0.5% that you would get as an incentive, but the penalty is the 2%, so it's more. If you're just looking to avoid that in 2016, then you would do the same thing. You would report on choose one measure from that individual measures list or one measures group and just report on that in any way. Again, so if you want to do the free way, you can do it through the claims. It's the CMS form 1500 or the electronic 837-P, or or choose a registry.
All right, here's another question for you, Joy. We've got time for maybe one or two more. My understanding is that to qualify for the incentive, each provider has to report 3 measures and achieve more than 80% data on those measures. Is that correct? And also, can the provider choose one measure from the diabetic group and the other 2 will be individual measures?
Okay, so the first part you're correct. You can report on 3 individual measures, and if you choose the registry or the EHR method, then you would need to, that threshold would be the 80%. However, if you choose the claims, then that threshold is reduced to just 50%. That's all that the patients would need to, like the numerator denominator just needs to be 50%. The second part of that question was, can you repeat it?
Sure. Can a provider choose one measure from the diabetic group and then the other 2 will be individual measures?
No. You can't, unfortunately. So they have the very specific measures groups. So you can choose, and keep in mind that if you choose a measures groups, it's not necessarily 3, and it could be 3, it could be 4 or 5 or 6 measures that compile that group, and you can't just choose 3 within them or report on a partial. You have to report on all of them, and then also keep in mind that you can't just take group, measures from, do a little cherry picking of, I like this measure from that group and this measure from that group, and try to mix and match them to create your own measures group. That's a no-no. But the majority of the measures that are included in the measures groups are also on the individual measures list. So if you had that one measure, that the first one, and then 2 just happen to be in the diabetics group, but they're also on the individual measure list, then you can absolutely use those 3 to report on.
And the purpose of the groups is that it provides a coherent, call it a coherent thematic set of data about a particular area of focus.
Exactly.
So it makes sense that they would be, you need to report on the group if you're going that route.
Yeah, if you see if you're a chiropractor, there's a back pain group, so then you can go and report specifically on just those particular measures. But keep in mind, it is very, very important to look at the specifications of each measure, because sometimes they change them even between the individual measures and the measures groups. So if you look at the requirements for one measure that's included in a group, and then you go look at it separately in the individual, manual, they may not align. So it's important to just know ahead of time, okay, which one you're choosing, and make sure you're looking at the right resource that tells you all of the specification details.
That's good advice. Well, I think we have time for one more question. Do participants, okay, I think we've addressed this, but it's still worth discussing again. Do participants in the PQRS EHR incentive pilot program receive two separate payments? One for the meaningful use and one for the PQRS? Actually, I don't know if we did address that. That's a good question.
That is a good question. You will get two separate payments. So what will happen is that you'll get the EHR incentive payment typically in the, depending on when you submit, in the spring of the following year. So, and then the PQRS payment is its own distinct payment that typically comes around September, October, August, September, October of the same year. So if you're reporting say 2000, let's fast forward a year and say you're doing the 2014 CQM and PQRS program and you report that first week of January 2015, you would get your EHR incentive payment sometime between January and March of that year, but the PQRS payment wouldn't come until 6 months later.
All right, I think that makes sense. So I'm afraid we're out of time for questions. We haven't gotten to quite all of our questions. We thank our guests for those questions. Lots of great interest in this issue, as you can tell. As always, we'll send out written answers to these questions. So if we didn't get to you in the session, keep your eyes peeled for that follow-up email with written answers from Joy. Thank you, Joy, for joining us for today's Learning Lunch. These are great sessions.
Yeah, these are a lot of fun. I'm glad we got to get to a lot of questions today. That was great.
People always have a lot of questions during your webinars because I think it's so hard for anyone to find the resources they need on this. So it's very useful to people. You can read the Ask Joy column at Format Approved to keep up with meaningful use and other HIT topics. Click on the Content tab on formatapproved.com and then select Joy from among our regular columnists. Remember that Format Approved provides an abundance of free educational content on meaningful use, HIPAA, EHR, and more. Again, I'd like to thank our attendees. Remember that all registered attendees will receive an email with links to both the slides and the video recording of this session. For comprehensive training in meaningful use, register for Format Approved's Certified Meaningful Use Professional course. The course covers the requirements for both Stage 1 and Stage 2 of meaningful use for both eligible professionals and eligible hospitals, along with clinical quality measures, HIPAA considerations, and more. I should mention that that course was authored by our own Joy Rios, so you know it's of the highest quality. And indeed, it's one of our more popular courses. Visit formatapproved.com to learn more about our upcoming Learning Lunches. The Learning Lunch button will take you to our entire slate of upcoming webinars. Our next Learning Lunch will air next week, November 12th, and will cover the subject of switching EMRs. Is the pain worth the gain? With all the talk about rip and replace going on now, I think that's certainly a timely subject for many people out there. Keep an eye on your email box on our homepage for other upcoming topics, and thank you again for joining us today.